If you enjoyed this audiobook, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1. It's Not About the Money. Part 1. The Night I Checked My Balance at 2 a.m. You are not the only person who has ever lain awake at 2 a.m., staring at a number on a screen, wondering how things got this bad. It usually starts small. You can't sleep, your mind drifts, and then, almost without deciding to, you open your banking app. Maybe you're hoping the number will be better than you remember. It never is, and suddenly you're not just tired, you're scared. That moment, right there, that is what this book is about. Not budgets, not investment portfolios, not 5-step plans printed on a page. This book is about that feeling, the tight chest, the shallow breathing, the spiral of worst-case thoughts that starts with, "I can't cover this bill," and ends, somehow, at "my life is falling apart." If you have ever been there, you already know how fast that spiral moves. What makes it worse is the silence around it. Nobody talks about this at work. Nobody posts about it on social media, at least not honestly. You sit in meetings, smile at dinners, and carry the whole weight of it completely alone. And somewhere underneath all of it is this quiet, crushing thought: I should have figured this out by now. That thought is a lie, and the numbers back that up. The American Psychological Association has tracked stress in the United States for years. Money consistently ranks as the top source of stress for adults, above work, above health, above relationships. A 2023 survey found that 72% of Americans reported feeling stressed about money at least some of the time. That is not a fringe experience, that is almost everyone. Financial therapist Lindsay Bryan Podvin makes a point worth sitting with. Financial anxiety is not a character flaw. It is a stress response. Your nervous system does not know the difference between a physical threat and an overdrawn account. It reacts the same way. Heart rate up, thinking clouded, body on high alert. You are not weak, you are wired. Morgan Housel in The Psychology of Money puts it simply: no one is taught how to handle money emotionally. We get maths in school. We do not get lessons on fear or shame or the way a difficult childhood can shape every financial decision we make as an adult. So here you are, a normal person, carrying a completely normal burden, feeling completely alone in it. That changes right now. This chapter will not fix your finances. That comes later. Right now, the only goal is this: you should feel seen. Genuinely, fully seen. Not judged, not lectured, not handed a checklist. Just seen. Because before anything can get better, someone has to say out loud what is actually happening. And what is happening is that money has become the thing you fear most. And you are exhausted from pretending otherwise. Part 2. The stories your parents told you about money. Think about the first time you felt truly scared about money. Chances are, that fear was not yours alone. It was borrowed. Absorbed quietly from the people who raised you, long before you had any say in the matter. Children are remarkably good at reading the emotional temperature of a room. If the mood at home shifted whenever a bill arrived, you noticed. If your parents whispered about money or went completely silent when it came up, you registered that silence as danger. Not because anyone sat you down and explained anything, but because you were paying attention. Financial therapists call this your money blueprint. It is the invisible set of rules you carry into every financial decision as an adult. You did not choose it. You did not write it. It was handed to you, often by people who had their own inherited rules, passed down from their parents and their parents before them. Some of the most common money scripts go something like this: rich people are greedy. Money is the root of all problems. We are not the kind of people who have savings. You should always look successful, even when you are not. These messages do not always come through words. Sometimes they come through behavior: a parent who spent freely to feel better, another who gripped every coin out of sheer terror. And here is what makes it complicated. Many people grew up hearing two completely opposite messages at the same time. Enjoy life, spend freely, but also save every penny, you never know what's coming. Both messages running together create a kind of internal noise that never quite stops. Morgan Housel makes a sharp observation in The Psychology of Money, that no one is crazy when it comes to money. People make the decisions that make sense based on what they have personally experienced. A person who grew up watching their family lose everything will treat a savings account like a lifeline, even when they are financially comfortable years later. The fear does not update automatically just because the circumstances do. So here's a question worth sitting with. What did money actually mean in the house you grew up in? Not what you were told, but what you felt. Was it a source of safety or tension? Was talking about it normal or forbidden? Did having more of it mean you were a good person or a suspect one? There are no wrong answers. This is not about blaming your parents or revisiting old pain for the sake of it. Most parents passed on what they themselves were given, and they did the best they could with it. The point of looking back is not blame, it is visibility. Because a rule you cannot see still runs your life. Once you can see it clearly, you get to decide whether it is actually true, and whether it still belongs to you. Part 3. When fear pretends to be a plan. Once you see that fear is running your financial life, you cannot unsee it, and that changes everything. Most people who worry about money believe they are being responsible. They check their bank balance before every purchase. They say no to things they can actually afford. They lose sleep over a car repair bill that technically they can handle. From the outside, this looks like discipline. From the inside, it feels like dread, and there is a real difference between the two. Discipline is calm. It makes decisions and moves on. Fear loops. It checks the same number 5 times and still feels no better. That looping is the giveaway. Financial therapist Lindsay Bryan Podvin calls this pattern hypervigilance, and the cruel thing about it is that it looks like control while feeling like chaos. You are doing all the right things, but none of them bring peace. The account balance does not change between your second and third check of the day. The anxiety does not either. Then there is the opposite end, the person who stops looking altogether. Not because they are careless, but because looking feels unbearable. Unopened bank statements, ignored emails from the credit card company, a vague, permanent sense of dread with no clear shape. This is financial avoidance, and it is just as much a fear response as obsessive checking. One person runs toward the fire to feel in control. The other runs away to feel safe. Neither is actually safe. There is also a third pattern that sits right in the middle. You know exactly what you should do. Open a savings account, call about that debt, make a budget. You have known for months, maybe years, but something stops you every time. You sit down to do it, and suddenly you need a glass of water, or the laundry needs moving, or you tell yourself you will do it properly at the weekend. This is financial paralysis, and it is not laziness. It is fear with very good excuses. Morgan Housel in The Psychology of Money makes a point that cuts right to the heart of this. People's financial behaviors rarely come from stupidity. They almost always come from emotion. The same emotion that makes someone impulsively spend after a terrible week at work, chasing a few minutes of relief in a new purchase, only to feel the dread return heavier than before. All of these patterns, obsessive checking, avoidance, paralysis, impulsive spending, share one thing. They are all attempts to manage anxiety. And they all fail because they address the feeling without ever addressing the cause. The anxiety feeds itself through the very behaviors designed to quiet it. Ask yourself honestly, which pattern feels most familiar? Not which one you wish was yours, which one you actually recognize when no one is watching. Seeing the pattern clearly is not a small thing. The whole point of this part of the journey. You cannot change a habit you have not yet named. Part 4. Naming the monster under the bed. So you have spotted the pattern. Now comes the harder question. What exactly are you afraid of? Most people, when asked what stresses them about money, say something vague. I just worry about money all the time. That is an honest answer, but it is also a blurry one. Blurry fear is exhausting because it has no edges. You cannot push back against something you cannot see. That is why naming the specific fear matters more than most people realize. Financial stress usually comes from one of 4 places. The first is debt, and more precisely, the shame that rides alongside it. When someone owes money, especially on credit cards, there is often a point where the letters stop getting opened, where the phone gets ignored, where checking the balance feels physically impossible. This is not laziness. This is shame doing what shame always does, convincing you that looking will only make things worse. The second trigger is scarcity, the feeling that there will never be enough, no matter what. This one is interesting because it does not always match the bank balance. Some people earning a comfortable salary still feel financially unsafe. They grew up watching money disappear, or they lived through a period of real hardship, and that experience left a permanent mark. The feeling of not enough became a background hum that income alone cannot quiet. The third is uncertainty, the dread of what might go wrong. This person is not necessarily in trouble right now, but they cannot stop imagining the moment when they might be. What if the car breaks down? What if I lose my job? What if the rent goes up? Uncertainty-driven anxiety is future-focused, and it can be just as paralyzing as real crisis. The fourth is social comparison. This one has always existed, but it has been made sharper by social media. Someone scrolling through images of holidays, renovations, and restaurant meals can feel financially behind in a way that has nothing to do with their actual situation. The comparison is almost always unfair. You are seeing someone else's highlight reel, but the sting is real. Most people reading this will recognize pieces of themselves in more than one category. That is normal. But if you sit with it honestly, one of these 4 tends to sit closer to the center than the others. One tends to be the trigger that gets the whole spiral going. Here is a simple reflection to try. Think back to the last time you felt real financial stress, the kind that kept you up or made your chest tight. What was the thought underneath it? Was it I owe too much? Was it there will never be enough? Was it something bad is coming? Or was it everyone else is doing better than me? That thought is not a weakness, it is a clue. And now that you have it, you have somewhere specific to start. Chapter 2. Stop running, start seeing. Part 1. The avoidance trap. Not looking at something scary doesn't make it less scary, it just gives the fear more time to grow roots. Think about the last time you ignored a bill, skipped checking your bank account, or let a call from an unknown number go to voicemail 3 times in a row. It probably felt like the right move in the moment, like a small act of self-protection. But later that day, or that night, did the worry actually go away? Probably not. It likely sat in the back of your mind, quietly getting louder. That's the trap. Avoidance feels like relief, but it's really just delayed pain with added interest. Your brain isn't being irrational when it pushes you to avoid. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. The part of your brain that handles threat, the amygdala, can't always tell the difference between a lion chasing you and a credit card bill sitting on your kitchen counter. Both feel dangerous. Both trigger the same basic response: run, fight, or freeze. Most of us freeze. We don't open the letter. We don't log in. We don't call back. And the brain, proud of itself for keeping you safe, files avoidance away as a useful strategy. The problem is that money doesn't pause while you look away. Interest accrues. Deadlines pass. Late fees land. And each day that goes by without looking adds one more layer of dread to the pile. Not because things are necessarily worse, but because the unknown grows in your imagination far faster than any debt ever could. There's a well-documented concept in psychology called the anticipation gap. The fear of doing something difficult is almost always worse than the experience of actually doing it. Researchers at the University of Michigan found that people consistently overestimate how bad a difficult experience will feel, and underestimate how much better they feel once they face it. Financial avoidance is one of the clearest examples of this in everyday life. The dread of opening the account is in most cases far heavier than the reality inside it. Financial therapist Lindsay Bryan Podvin describes this cycle plainly. Avoidance feeds anxiety, and anxiety feeds avoidance. Each loop makes the next one harder to break. But here's what's also true. The loop can be broken at any point, and it only takes one small act to do it. That act is simply looking, not fixing, not calculating, not building a plan or making calls or paying anything off, just opening the account and seeing what's there. That's the whole invitation for now, because you cannot change what you refuse to see, and seeing, just seeing, is almost always the moment the fear starts to shrink rather than grow. Part 2. 1 honest hour with your money. That single act of looking, the one we talked about in the last section, is powerful. But it only works if you give it a proper home. That's what the honest hour is, a home for looking. Think of it this way. You probably tidy your house every so often, not because it's a crisis, not because someone's coming over and you're panicking, just because keeping things orderly makes life feel calmer. The honest hour works exactly like that. It's a regular, quiet sit-down with your money. No drama, no pressure, just you checking in. Here's what it actually looks like. Make a cup of tea, sit somewhere you feel comfortable, open your bank app or your statements or whatever you use, and for the next 30 to 60 minutes, you simply look at 3 things: what came in, what went out, and what is owed. That's the whole exercise. You are not solving anything. You are not fixing anything. You are just noting what is there. The reason this works so well is that anxiety grows in the dark. When you never look at your money, your brain fills in the gaps, and it almost always fills them with something worse than reality. Bari Tesler, author of The Art of Money, spent years helping people heal their relationship with money, and one of her core tools was exactly this kind of gentle, regular check-in. She called it a money date. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the repetition, the calm, and the absence of judgment. Because here's the hard part, the voice that shows up. Most people, the first time they sit down for an honest hour, meet a very unpleasant guest. The inner critic. It's the voice that says you should have known better, that you're bad with money, that other people your age have it sorted. That voice is not helpful, and it is not telling the truth. It is just a habit, a pattern your brain learned from years of being told that money problems are personal failures. When that voice appears, and it will, the trick is not to argue with it. Just notice it. You can even say quietly, that's the critic, not the facts. Then return to the numbers, the facts, just the numbers. Over time, something interesting happens. The honest hour stops feeling like a confrontation and starts feeling like a routine. The anxiety attached to it fades, not because your finances magically improve, but because you have shown your nervous system, again and again, that looking is safe. That's the real shift. Lindsay Bryan Podvin, a financial therapist, describes this kind of repeated, low-stakes exposure to financial reality as one of the most effective ways to reduce money anxiety long-term. Not because the numbers change immediately, but because your relationship with them does. Start with once a month. Same day, same time, same cup of tea. Just show up. Part 3. Enough is a number, not a feeling. Most people spend their entire lives chasing more money without ever stopping to ask what the actual destination looks like. That question, how much is enough, sounds almost too simple to be worth asking. But Vicki Robin, who wrote Your Money or Your Life, spent decades arguing it is the most important financial question most of us never ask. We set no finish line, so we keep running, and we wonder why we feel exhausted and behind, even when things are, by any fair measure, okay. Here's what financial stress does quietly. It moves the goalposts. You earn more, and suddenly enough becomes a slightly bigger number. You pay off one debt, and your brain immediately locks on to the next worry. The feeling of security stays just out of reach, not because you are failing, but because you have never defined what reaching it actually means. This is not a character flaw. It is how most of us were raised to think about money. More is better, always. Nobody sat us down and asked, what would genuinely feel safe to you? So ask it now. Sit with it. What monthly income would make you feel like you could breathe? Not rich, just safe. What amount sitting in a savings account would stop that tight feeling in your chest at 2 a.m.? If you had a certain buffer, say 1 month of expenses or 3, which one would actually change how you feel day to day? These are not dreamy, abstract questions. They are practical ones. And the moment you write the answers down, something real happens. A number on paper is no longer a feeling in your body. It becomes a target you can actually hit. Lindsay Bryan Podvin talks about how financial anxiety often thrives in vagueness. When enough is undefined, your nervous system treats every financial moment as a potential emergency. Writing your enough number down does not solve your finances, but it does give your brain a clear signal. Here is what safe looks like. Morgan Housel makes a related point in The Psychology of Money. He describes people who had enormous wealth and still felt poor, not because they lacked money, but because they had no sense of what was sufficient. The comparison to others kept shifting the line. Someone always had more. Your enough is not someone else's enough. A single parent in a small flat has a different enough than a couple with a paid-off mortgage. Neither number is wrong. The only wrong move is leaving the number blank. Write it down. What income feels safe? What savings buffer would let you sleep? What debt total feels manageable rather than crushing? These numbers, once they exist on paper, stop being a feeling and start being a plan. And plans, even rough ones, are far less frightening than the open dark. Part 4. Your money map, drawn in pencil, not stone. Once you have your enough number written down, the next natural question is, what does the full picture actually look like right now? Not what you wish it looked like. Not what it looked like 2 years ago. Right now. That's where the money map comes in. 1 page, 3 columns, no spreadsheet skills required. You write down everything that comes in. Your salary, any side income, benefits, child support, whatever lands in your account. Then you write down what goes out. Rent, food, subscriptions, fuel, the gym you keep meaning to cancel. Then in the 3rd column, you list what you owe, starting from the smallest amount to the largest. That's it. The whole thing can be done in 20 minutes with a cup of tea and a pencil. The pencil part matters. A pencil means this is not permanent. It's not a contract. It's not a judgment passed by a court. It's just a sketch, the kind you can rub out and redraw as things change. When people hear financial plan, they often picture something rigid and perfect and final. This is the opposite. This is a rough draft of where things stand today. What tends to happen when people actually do this exercise is quietly surprising. The number that has been living in the back of your mind, that dark, shapeless sense of how bad things are, almost always looks smaller on paper than it felt in your head. Morgan Housel writes about how our worst financial fears tend to expand in the absence of facts. The map gives you facts, and facts, even uncomfortable ones, are easier to work with than fog. The map also shows you things you did not know you had forgotten. A streaming service you signed up for during a free trial 3 years ago. A small charge that comes out every month that you have genuinely never noticed. Tiffany Aliche, in her work with thousands of everyday people, found that most of her clients were surprised by at least one regular expense they could not account for. Not because they were careless, but because these things hide in plain sight when you're not looking clearly. And sometimes the debt column reveals something important too. The number that has been making you feel sick with shame turns out to be 4 figures, not 5. The fear was bigger than the fact. That does not make the debt easy to deal with, but it does make it possible. The map is not a verdict on your choices, your character, or your future. Barry Tesler puts it plainly: before you can change your financial life, you have to see it without shame. Just see it. The map is how you do that. Whatever your 3 columns contain right now, they represent a starting point. And a starting point, however messy or uncomfortable, is something real to stand on. Chapter 3. Small Moves, Big Exhale. Part 1. The One Thing Rule. Most people don't fail at managing money because they're bad at math. They fail because the list gets too long and the brain quietly gives up. Think about the last time you felt behind on money. Did you sit down and fix everything? Probably not. More likely you thought about it, felt awful, and then watched something on TV. That's not weakness. That's a completely normal response to being overwhelmed. When the brain sees too many problems at once, it shuts down, not out of laziness, out of self-protection. This is where the one thing rule comes in. It's simple. Pick the single financial stressor taking up the most space in your head and deal only with that. Not everything, just that one thing. Neuroscience backs this up. When you complete even a small task, your brain releases dopamine, the chemical tied to reward and motivation. That small chemical hit makes you want to do the next thing. Action creates more action, but only if you start somewhere real and manageable. Trying to fix 10 things at once doesn't trigger that response. It triggers dread. So how do you find your one thing? Ask yourself honestly, what money thought wakes me up at 3 a.m.? What bill do I flinch at? What account do I avoid looking at? That thing, the one your mind keeps circling back to, is usually it. For some people, it's building a small cash buffer so one unexpected expense doesn't collapse the whole week. For others, it's making a single phone call to a lender to ask about a payment plan, a call that feels terrifying but takes 4 minutes. For others, it's canceling one subscription they don't use but feel guilty about every month. None of these are dramatic. That's exactly the point. Lindsay Bryan Podvin, a financial therapist, talks about how shame and anxiety keep people stuck, not because they lack information, but because the emotional weight makes starting feel impossible. The one thing rule removes that weight. You're not committing to a full financial overhaul. You're committing to one small, honest act. There will be a voice, maybe loud, maybe just a whisper, that says one thing isn't enough, that you should be doing more, that real change requires bigger moves. That voice is wrong, and it's also not trying to help you. It's the same voice that made the list feel so long in the first place. One thing is always enough to begin. Morgan Housel puts it well in The Psychology of Money. Reasonable behavior done consistently beats theoretically perfect behavior done inconsistently. You don't need the perfect plan. You need the first real step. Do the one thing, feel the small relief, then let that relief carry you to the next one. Part 2. Set it, forget it, breathe. That one small step you just took, it works even better when you stop having to think about it every single day. Decision fatigue is real, and it quietly drains more energy than most people realize. Every time you ask yourself whether to move money to savings, whether to pay a bill now or later, whether you remembered that direct debit, your brain uses actual fuel. By the time evening comes, you're tired, not just physically, mentally. And tired brains make worse money choices. Ramit Sethi figured out a simple fix for this. In I Will Teach You to Be Rich, he describes a money flow system that works like a quiet machine in the background. On payday, money moves automatically. Fixed bills go first. Then a set amount flows straight into savings, even if it's just £20. Then a debt payment goes out. What's left is yours, completely guilt-free, to spend however you want. No tracking, no second guessing, no shame. The genius of it isn't the numbers, it's the removal of daily choices. You stop needing to be disciplined every single morning because the system is already doing the work while you sleep. Think of it like setting up a drip irrigation system in a garden. You don't stand there every day with a watering can. You set it up once and the plants get what they need. Your money works the same way. Now, a concern comes up almost every time this idea gets introduced. People say, what if I lose track of what's happening? That's a fair worry. Automation doesn't mean disappearing. A simple fix is a monthly 5-minute check-in, just one glance at your accounts to confirm everything moved as expected. Set a reminder on your phone. Call it Money Minute. 5 minutes, once a month, that's it. Lindsay Bryan Podvin writes in The Financial Anxiety Solution that much of financial stress doesn't come from the actual money situation. It comes from the constant mental monitoring of it. When you automate, you replace that constant low-level hum of worry with something quieter, a system you trust. The fear underneath automation is often that you'll lose control. But here's what's actually true. Most people who are manually managing everything don't feel in control. They feel exhausted and behind. Automation doesn't take control away from you. It gives you the kind of control that doesn't require suffering for it. Start small. One automatic transfer to savings, even if it's £10 a week. One bill set to autopay. That's your one thing for this section. Feel how much lighter it gets when one decision removes itself from your day permanently. Then add another. Let the system grow slowly, at a pace that feels safe. You are not giving up. You are finally putting the right things on autopilot so your mind can breathe. Part 3. Debt without shame. Most people don't avoid debt because they lack a plan. They avoid it because looking at it feels like looking at proof that they failed. That feeling is a lie. A convincing one, but still a lie. Debt is not a character flaw. It is a number, sometimes a big, ugly number, but a number with a solution. Millions of people carry debt right now. Medical bills, student loans, credit cards maxed out during a hard season, borrowed money from a parent during a crisis. None of that makes someone a bad person. It makes them a person in a tight spot who needs a clear path, not a louder inner critic. The shame, though, is the real problem. Financial therapists like Lindsay Bryan Podvin have seen it over and over. The shame around debt is often more damaging than the debt itself. Shame drives avoidance. Avoidance lets interest grow quietly in the background, and before long, a manageable problem becomes a much bigger one, not because of poor character, but because shame made it too painful to look at. So the first move here is not a spreadsheet. It is permission. Permission to look at your debt without deciding what it says about you as a human being. Once you have that, the practical part is simpler than you think. Write down every debt you carry: lender, balance, interest rate. That list, however uncomfortable, is the first honest conversation you've had with that debt in a while. It is also, quietly, an act of courage. Now you have two options for where to start. The avalanche method means tackling the debt with the highest interest rate first, since that one costs you the most money over time. The snowball method, made popular by Dave Ramsey, means starting with the smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate. You pay it off faster, feel a real win, and use that momentum to hit the next one. Neither method is wrong. The right one is whichever you will actually stick to. Make the minimum payments on everything else, and put whatever small extra amount you can find toward your chosen target. Even 20 extra pounds a month matters. Consistency beats size every single time. There is a particular kind of debt that carries extra weight: money borrowed from family or a friend. The financial and the personal are tangled together, and that tangle breeds its own specific shame. If this is you, hold both things at once: the practical obligation to repay what you can, and the relational honesty of communicating where you are. A brief, calm conversation, even a short message that says, "I haven't forgotten, and here is my plan," does more for the relationship than silence ever will. Paying off debt slowly is not failing. It is one of the most disciplined, most courageous things a person can do with money. Every payment, even the small ones, is proof that you chose to face it rather than run. Part 4. The tiny safety net. Most people think saving money requires having money to spare, but the truth is more interesting than that. You do not need a big sum to feel safer. You need any sum. Even £200 sitting in a separate account changes how your brain processes a financial threat. Not because £200 solves anything serious, but because for the first time in a while, you have a gap between you and the next problem. That gap, however small, is where calm lives. Behavioral economists call this a buffer. Lindsay Bryan Podvin, a financial therapist, describes it as the difference between reacting to money and responding to it. When there is nothing set aside, every unexpected expense feels like a crisis. Your brain enters survival mode. And in survival mode, people make worse decisions. They panic spend, avoid opening letters, and freeze when they should act. A small buffer interrupts that cycle. The traditional advice, save 3 to 6 months of expenses, is correct in theory and useless in practice for anyone who cannot cover this week's costs. So ignore it for now. The real target is your first £200, then £300, then £500. Not all at once, not by next month, just slowly, quietly, over time. If you can put away £5 a week, that is £260 in a year. If £20 a month is more realistic, that is still £240. Neither sounds like much. Both feel like a lot when your boiler breaks or your car fails its MOT and you are not starting from zero. The hardest part for most people is not building the buffer, it is keeping it. The moment it reaches a real size, something in the brain says, "This could fix that other problem. This could cover that thing I've been putting off." And suddenly the buffer is gone and you are starting again. Mentally, the buffer needs a different status from regular savings. It is not money waiting to be spent on something better. It is money whose only job is to exist. Tiffany Aliche suggests naming the account something specific, emergency only, or do not touch, because a named purpose creates a small psychological barrier between you and an impulsive withdrawal. It sounds almost too simple. It works more often than you would expect. Think of the tiny safety net less as a financial strategy and more as an act of care toward yourself. You have probably spent a long time managing money under pressure, making every decision with nothing to fall back on. This is the first step toward a different kind of normal. Not wealthy, not worry-free, just slightly less exposed than yesterday. That is not a small thing. That is, quietly, everything. Part 5. Spending that feels like you. Most people don't overspend because they're careless. They overspend on things they never actually wanted in the first place. That sentence is worth sitting with. Because if you have ever felt guilty after checking your bank statement, the guilt probably wasn't about the total. It was about the mismatch. You spent money, but you don't feel like you got anything. The purchase didn't feel like you. It felt like something you did on autopilot, or because someone expected it, or because an ad made it look like a good idea at the time. Vicki Robin, who wrote Your Money or Your Life, had a way of describing money that changed how a lot of people think about it. She said money is life energy. Every pound you spend represents time you spent earning it. So the real question when you spend isn't just can I afford this, it's was this worth that piece of my life? That shifts everything. Financial therapists call the alternative values-aligned spending. It's a simple idea. You spend on what actually matters to you, and you stop spending as much as you can on what doesn't. Not because you're being strict with yourself, because spending on the wrong things is what creates that hollow, anxious feeling after a purchase. Think about someone who cuts back on almost everything, but books one holiday a year and pays for it without guilt. Most people would call that person financially odd. But they're actually doing something most people never manage. They know what they value, and they spend accordingly. Compare that to someone who spends heavily on subscriptions they don't use, rounds they didn't want to buy, gifts that go unappreciated, all out of habit or social pressure, and still skips the one thing that would actually make them happy. That's not responsibility. That's misalignment. Here's a simple thing to try. Look at your last month of spending, every category, even the small ones. For each one, ask yourself a single honest question. Did I choose this, or did it just happen? Did buying this feel like me? You might be surprised. Most people who do this discover two things at once. They are spending money on things they have never consciously decided to spend money on. And they are quietly skimping on the things that actually bring them genuine satisfaction. The dinner with a close friend, the class they keep putting off, the trip they've talked about for 3 years. Realigning your spending doesn't mean spending less. It means spending with your eyes open. And that kind of honesty, the kind that says, this is what I actually care about, and I'm going to spend like it, takes more of the daily anxiety out of money than almost any other single shift you can make. When your spending starts to reflect your actual life, the guilt gets quieter, because you're finally using it as yours. Chapter 4. A New Kind of Rich. Part 1. The Feeling You're Actually Chasing. Most people spend their whole lives chasing a number, but the number was never the point. Ask someone why they want more money, and they'll say things like, I just want to feel okay, or I don't want to worry so much, or I want options. Nobody says, I want a higher net worth. They want the feeling, safety, ease, the quiet confidence that if something goes wrong, they can handle it. That feeling has a name, financial well-being, and it is not the same thing as financial wealth. This is where most money advice goes wrong. It talks about income, returns, and savings rates. It skips the question that actually matters. What feeling are you trying to create? Because once you know that, the path becomes much shorter than you think. If the feeling you want is safety, you don't need to be rich to get there. Research from Princeton University found that emotional well-being, the actual feeling of being okay on a daily basis, stops improving significantly beyond a modest income threshold. More money above that level changes your life circumstances, but not your nervous system. A 3-month emergency buffer and a predictable monthly income can do more for your sense of safety than a salary raise you spend before it lands. If what you want is freedom, the fastest route might not be earning more. It might be cutting the fixed costs that own your calendar, the subscriptions, the obligations, the lifestyle creep that quietly narrowed your choices. Vicki Robin put it simply in Your Money or Your Life. Every dollar you spend is a piece of your life energy. When you see it that way, spending less is not deprivation. It is buying back your time. And if what you want is dignity, the feeling that you are not ashamed of where you stand, then no amount of money will fix it until you address the shame directly. Barry Tesler's work on money healing makes this point clearly. Shame keeps people avoiding their accounts, ignoring their debt, and making decisions from fear rather than choice. Releasing that shame is not a soft, optional step. It is often the first real one. So what feeling are you actually chasing? Sit with that question honestly. Not what you think you should want, not what your parents wanted. What would make you exhale? Once you name it, the next step becomes clear. Not the perfect step, not the biggest step, just the smallest move that takes you meaningfully closer to that feeling. Maybe it's opening the account you've been avoiding. Maybe it's writing down one number. Maybe it's having one honest conversation. That clarity, knowing what you're really after and taking one true step toward it, is itself a form of being rich. Part 2. Your money, your values, your life. Most people never stop to ask whether the life they are paying for is actually the life they want. That clarity you found in the last exercise, naming the feeling you are chasing, is powerful on its own. But it becomes even more powerful when you hold it up against your values. Because your values are the reason behind the feeling. They are the deeper answer to the question of why. Here is a simple exercise borrowed from financial therapy and values-based coaching. Write down 3 things that matter most to you in life. Not financially, just in life. Family, freedom, security, creative work, adventure, health, community. Whatever comes up naturally, write them down before you overthink it. Now look at your last month of spending. Not to judge it, just to see it. Ask one honest question. Does this reflect the 3 things I just wrote down? For many people, this is the first time they have ever placed those 2 things side by side. And what comes up is often surprising. Some people realize they have been spending heavily on things that genuinely do reflect their values, and they feel an unexpected wave of relief. They were not failing. They were already living with more intention than they gave themselves credit for. Others spot one clear misalignment. Maybe they wrote down family time, but are spending significant money on things that actually keep them away from the people they love. Maybe they wrote freedom, but are committed to monthly payments on a lifestyle that makes them feel trapped. When you see that misalignment clearly, just one, not 10, it stops being a vague source of stress. It becomes a decision. Vicki Robin, who co-wrote Your Money or Your Life, described money as life energy. Every pound or dollar you spend represents hours of your life. When you frame it that way, the question changes from, can I afford this, to, is this worth my life energy? That is not guilt, that is clarity. The goal here is not to build a perfect budget or hit a specific number. Financial therapist Barry Tesler calls this a money body check. The practice of noticing how a financial decision actually feels in your body, before and after you make it. Tight chest or open breath, dread or quiet satisfaction. Your body often knows the misalignment before your spreadsheet does. What makes money feel manageable is not having more of it. It is making choices that feel like yours, choices rooted in what you actually believe in, not what you inherited by default or absorbed from someone else's highlight reel. You do not need a complete financial overhaul. You need one honest look, one named value, and one decision that points in the right direction. That is enough to start building a financial life that feels like home. Part 3. What you'll tell your kids about money. Most of what you believe about money, you did not choose. It was handed to you before you were old enough to question it. Think about the first money memory you have. Was it a parent stressing over bills? A family rule that you never talk about what things cost? A sense that wanting more was greedy, or that spending freely was the mark of success? Those early scenes shaped the way your nervous system responds to money right now. You did not pick those stories. But the people who come after you, the children you have, the younger siblings, the nieces, nephews, the students, the friends who look up to you, they are still in the part of their story where the first chapters are being written. That is not a small thing. Research consistently shows that children who grow up in homes where money is talked about openly, not perfectly, but honestly, develop calmer, healthier money habits as adults. Not because their parents were wealthy, because their parents were real. They saw adults make decisions out loud. They heard, we are choosing not to buy that right now because we are saving for something else. They witnessed someone face a financial mistake without collapsing under shame. You do not need to be a financial expert to give someone that gift. You just need to be willing to be honest. If you have children in your life, start small. When you make a money decision, say it out loud. I picked the store brand because the other one costs twice as much and tastes the same. That sentence teaches more than any lesson about budgeting ever could. It shows that money decisions are normal, considered, and connected to something. Not shameful, not panicked, not secret. When things get tight, you don't need to pretend otherwise. Age-appropriate honesty. We are being careful with spending this month. Removes the invisible tension children already feel but cannot name. Named things are less frightening than unnamed ones. And if you don't have children, this still applies to you. The way you talk about money in front of others matters. The friend who hears you say, I made a bad financial call and I'm fixing it, learns something from that. The younger colleague who watches you handle a budget conversation without panic takes something from that too. Your relationship with money is not private in the way you think it is. Breaking a money cycle does not require dramatic transformation. It requires one generation, this one, meaning you, deciding to do it differently. Not flawlessly, just more consciously, more calmly, and with less shame than was passed down before. What you model is what gets inherited. Part 4. The day money stopped running your mood. And then one day, without ceremony, something shifts. You open your banking app on a Tuesday morning, not because you have to, not because you're bracing for bad news, but just to check. And you check, and you close it, and you pour your coffee. That's it. No spiral, no dread, no replaying of every purchase from the past week. Just a Tuesday morning. This is the moment nobody talks about. Not because it is small, but because it is hard to explain to someone who has not felt it. The absence of pain does not make headlines. But if you have spent years with a low hum of money anxiety running beneath every single day, this quiet Tuesday morning is everything. People who reach this point rarely get there because the numbers became perfect. Sarah, a primary school teacher, described it this way: not after a raise, not after paying off her student loan, but after months of looking at her finances honestly, making a simple plan she could actually stick to, and slowly releasing the shame that had kept her from looking at her bank account at all. The anxiety did not disappear because her balance grew. It faded because she stopped treating money as something happening to her and started treating it as something she could engage with. That is the actual shift, from passenger to participant. The unexpected car repair still stings. The higher electricity bill still makes you frown, but annoying and catastrophic are not the same thing anymore. And knowing the difference is a kind of freedom. When you have a small buffer, a clear picture of your spending, and a set of values guiding your choices, a financial surprise loses most of its power to ruin your week. The same goes for money conversations with the people closest to you. When there is no longer a backlog of guilt or defensiveness, a conversation about rent or groceries or savings is just a conversation, calm and direct, not a trigger. Think about what you have actually done throughout this book. You looked at your money without turning away. You traced your anxiety back to where it started. You connected your spending to what genuinely matters to you. You built habits small enough to keep. None of it was flashy. All of it was honest. Morgan Housel writes that financial success is less about intelligence and more about behavior. The quiet, repeated choices made when no one is watching. That is what this entire book has pointed toward. Not a single heroic financial decision, but hundreds of small, grounded ones. Financial peace is not a place you arrive at when the numbers are finally right. It is something you practice. One truthful look at your account, one values-led choice, one shame-free conversation at a time. And the most important thing to know is this: you do not need to be wealthy to start. You just need to begin. You already have.